When the world's most legendary makeup artist finally launched her own beauty brand in 2015, it seemed destined for greatness. Pat McGrath, the woman who'd created some of fashion's most iconic runway moments, dropped a single gold pigment kit online and it sold out in minutes. 3 years later, private equity valued her company at $1 billion. Today, that same company is in bankruptcy court fighting to survive. In today's episode, we break down exactly what happened. I'm Sammi Cohen, and this is Social Currency, a podcast that unpacks the stories that are shaping business, culture, and the intersection of the two. The Pat McGrath Labs story has a sparkly facade, a brilliant artist, a billion-dollar valuation, celebrity connections from Taylor Swift to Louis Vuitton, and a series of financial decisions that would ultimately bring it all crashing down. Even though some people may think that this is just a story about expensive eyeshadow palettes or shifting beauty trends, this goes much, much deeper. This is about what happens when the wrong money meets the right talent at exactly the worst time. In today's episode, we are going to trace how a carefully controlled luxury brand got trapped in a cycle of impossible growth expectations. We'll examine a 2018 private equity deal with a valuation so aggressive it should have set off alarm bells from day one. We'll also look at how Pat's resistance to playing the influencer game created friction with investors betting on a fast flip, and we'll talk about the predatory loan that turned a cash flow problem into an existential crisis. Here's what I'm saving for the very end. The one asset Pat McGrath pledged as collateral for that final loan, an asset that was so personal that losing it would mean losing more than just her business. It's a detail that reveals just how desperate things became and why this bankruptcy filing was actually her only path to fighting back. Let's start at the beginning. In case you've never heard of Pat, she is an icon in the fashion and beauty industry. By 2015, she'd already spent decades as the most sought-after makeup artist in fashion. She'd been the visionary behind the makeup looks on runways for fashion's elite. We're talking Dior, Versace, Prada, and many more. And these runway moments were ones that got talked about for years. She had relationships with every major luxury house, and she'd even created some of the best-selling products for other brands, including Armani's foundation, which many consider still to be the gold standard. When she decided to launch her own line, she did it her way. She started with just one product, Gold 001, and this was a limited edition gold pigment kit. It sold out online in minutes, and it immediately established something crucial, that her brand had a cult appeal. And over the next 2 years, Pat McGrath Labs expanded deliberately, new products rolled out slowly, and the brand entered 54 Sephora doors in 2017. The brand was built like an artist studio rather than a mass market machine. And this is actually remarkable because most beauty brands at this stage are burning through investor money just to get distribution. But because Pat McGrath already had that built-in audience, after all, she had millions of followers on Instagram, she immediately was able to move a lot of product. But then came 2018. Eurazeo Brands, a Paris-based private equity firm, made a $60 million investment in Pat McGrath Labs. And this isn't surprising that private equity became interested. The surprising factor here was the valuation. The deal valued Pat McGrath Labs at $1 billion. On the surface, this looked like a breakthrough moment. The press coverage was glowing, and remember, the beauty industry was in the midst of a boom. This was right after Kylie Cosmetics was sold to Coty, Charlotte Tilbury was on her way to a billion-dollar acquisition. But let's look at the math. $1 billion on $40 million in net sales, which is what they were allegedly doing at the time per puck, is a 25 times multiple. And for context, Even Road, which sold to e.l.f. in the middle of last year, went for a 3.8 multiple of net sales. So just comparing those two, 25 to 3.8. This level of overvaluation only makes sense if you're banking on hypergrowth and a fast exit. And here's the thing, Eurazeo only took around an 8% stake. On paper, that sounds like a founder-friendly deal, but that small stake also meant that this private equity firm needed the company's value to skyrocket for their investment to pay off. And they were likely investing to flip it to LVMH or one of the beauty behemoths like Estee Lauder within a few years, while that celebrity founder beauty boom was still hot. Their massive problem here was that Pat McGrath Labs wasn't built for that kind of growth. Here's where the fundamental tension emerges. Pat McGrath is a brilliant artist. She creates highly editorial makeup, the kind that looks amazing in photographs and on a runway, but it's harder to translate that into everyday products that consumers understand and also repurchase. Her mothership eyeshadow palettes were standout products, which are legendary among makeup artists and enthusiasts. They also cost more than double what competitors charge, but they were positioned as a luxury makeup brand. And when they initially launched, they had formula innovations that justified the price. But eventually, their quality started to decline and their packaging also seemed to cheapen. And unlike her peers in the celebrity makeup artist space, Pat wasn't trying to play the influencer game. You had Charlotte Tilbury, who built her brand on making Hollywood glamour accessible and showed up everywhere. She was at events, social media, masterclasses. Then there was Gucci Westman, who leaned into clean beauty and understatement, and she cultivated a devoted following. Pat McGrath remained more enigmatic. She's not on camera constantly, and she didn't like to do in-store appearances. She's a founder who felt more comfortable behind the camera than in front of it. And this isn't a criticism of her choices. It's a recognition that beauty in 2020 increasingly rewards founders who are visible, accessible, and personable. And once Pat became more symbolic than operational, there wasn't a clear engine underneath that could keep the brand culturally fluent on its own. In order to stay ahead of the curve in beauty, it requires constant newness, innovation, and a constant presence on social media. The numbers reflected this. Sales at Sephora began declining before COVID. The brand had expanded to 175 stores with plans to reach 250. Instead, that number started shrinking. Today, Pat McGrath Labs ranks around 40th best-selling makeup brand at Sephora, according to Puck, which is respectable, but nowhere near the top tier you'd expect from a one-time billion-dollar brand. And then there were the layoffs. At least 20% of staff between 2023 and 2024, according to former employees. Innovation slowed, and the brand kept releasing similar variations of the same palettes instead of creating new viral moments. And then Eurazeo wanted out. By 2021, Eurazeo had a problem because their growth story wasn't materializing. The makeup market was softening, and there were also macro trends across the industry, such as the clean girl aesthetic, which favored minimal makeup over dramatic editorial looks. And this private equity firm needed an exit, so enter Sienna Investment Managers, the investment arm of a Belgian holding company called GBL. In June 2021, Sienna paid $183 million for Eurazeo's stake, plus additional shares. However, at the time of this transaction, there was still hope that the company would be able to turn things around. The pressure to grow intensified. Sephora doors had grown from 25 in 2017 to the 162 by 2021. In 2023, the brand had made an even more desperate move. They also entered Ulta Beauty. But even Ulta was careful with its rollout because they only carried the brand in 200 out of the 1,400 stores. The distribution expansion wasn't solving the fundamental problem. The brand was being pushed to scale in ways that didn't align with its luxury, scarcity-driven positioning. They were trying to be everywhere and exclusive at the same time, which is nearly impossible to pull off, but especially not in luxury. They even did a Candy Crush collaboration in 2025, which seemed to miss the mark across every single category because Candy Crush doesn't exactly scream luxury makeup. It screams discount and cheap. On top of all of this, many Pat McGrath products were being sold in off-price retailers like Marshall's, and people were able to buy certain palettes for just a few dollars. It's safe to say that the brand equity was completely wiped out at this point. To no one's surprise, cash flow continued to be tight, and Pat's team needed a bridge loan to keep things running while they tried to figure out a longer-term solution. So she turned to a company called GDA PMG Funding LLC, which is a mouthful, and they advanced $17.5 million to Pat. And this is where things get truly predatory. The terms were brutal, and Pat pledged substantial collateral, company assets, intellectual property, and something even more personal that we'll get to in a little bit. The loan was structured in a way that if she defaulted, GDA could seize everything and force an immediate sale. And that's exactly what happened. By June 2025, less than a year after taking the loan, Pat couldn't repay or refinance. The $17.5 million somehow ballooned to a $43 million claim. How does a loan more than double in less than a year? Well, the details aren't fully public, but it suggests either extremely high interest rates, penalties, or something else that was supposed to pay down the loan that never happened. In December 2025, GDA announced that there would be a forced auction of Pat McGrath Labs with bids that would be due in January 2026. So under the proposed terms, GDA would be paid first, claiming their amounts owed. And just a few days before the auction deadline, Pat McGrath filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Now, this was a strategic countermove. The bankruptcy filing creates an automatic legal freeze that immediately stops GDA's auction. It places everything under bankruptcy court protection, giving Pat control over the restructuring process. Chapter 11 lets her fight back, negotiate terms, and potentially find a legitimate buyer or restructuring plan that doesn't just hand everything over to a predatory lender for pennies on the dollar. In her court filing, Pat blamed an unsustainable capital structure for the situation, fashion, but insisted that the demand for the brand's products remains strong. And GDA, for their part, released a statement saying that they've been a proactive partner and say that this last-minute Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing is the product of an unprincipled, last-ditch effort to avoid a value-maximizing Article 9 sale of the business. In layman's terms, they're pissed that they aren't going to be able to have this auction happen right now. And in a PR statement put out by Pat's company after the Chapter 11 was announced, Pat said, "For several months, I have acted at the behest of my lenders, but now it's time to reset, start fresh, and get back to the mission of bringing the highest quality makeup products to the marketplace." So now that we've covered the roller coaster of the situation, what could Pat McGrath have done differently? First, she could have stayed direct to consumer longer or partnered with a single luxury retailer instead of expanding into mass prestige. Second, she could have expanded through fragrance instead of more makeup. We're in a bit of a fragrance boom right now within the beauty category, and I could see Pat McGrath fragrances doing really, really well if they had gone into that category. Third, I think she needed to streamline operations before scaling. Reports describe Pat personally approving everything from formulations to packaging, often late at night. That level of founder control works for a small artisan brand, but that doesn't work when you're trying to hit the growth targets that come with being a billion-dollar brand. And on a similar note, the Glassdoor reviews for Pat McGrath Labs are pretty shocking. They currently have a 2.3 out of 5-star rating, and many reviews actually state that leadership was really disorganized and the strategy was all over the place. Fourth, she could have expanded her public presence. I'm not saying she needed to become an influencer, but some level of visibility, whether that's masterclasses, strategic appearances, behind-the-scenes content, would have definitely helped. Beauty consumers in the mid-2020s want to connect with founders. Pat's mystique worked for fashion insiders on runway shows, but it's harder to monetize that at scale. But the biggest mistake, in my opinion, was taking the money to scale as early as she did, and from the wrong partners. If Pat McGrath Labs was already in Sephora before the investment, and Sephora is owned by LVMH, many people are wondering why she didn't just partner with LVMH from the beginning. Timing was on her side. LVMH was actively investing in celebrity and influencer beauty through their Kendo incubator, and for whatever reason, we'll never fully know, that deal didn't come together. Of course, LVMH would have never offered that level of multiple, and they would have demanded a much larger stake likely. But here's the thing, even with those LVMH terms, Pat would have been in a much stronger position than she is today. And the irony is that Pat McGrath is now the creative director at Louis Vuitton Beauty. She stepped into this role in early 2025, and she's using her visionary eye to craft looks for them instead of building her own namesake brand at this point. And yes, she's probably well compensated, but she could have been an owner within the LVMH portfolio, building equity while still creating. Instead, she took private equity money that locked her into impossible growth expectations, and when things got tight, left her vulnerable to predatory lending. Here's what I promised to reveal at the end, the detail that shows just how dire the situation became. When Pat McGrath took that $17.5 million loan from GDA, it wasn't just the company that was on the line. According to the auction materials published by Hilco Global, the firm managing the forced sale, they were offering the assets of luxury beauty and color cosmetics brand Pat McGrath Labs, including collateral pledged by Pat McGrath Cosmetics LLC and Patricia McGrath. Notice that word "and." That's not just company assets. Patricia McGrath, the person, pledged personal collateral separate from the business itself. The exact details of what that personal collateral included haven't been made fully public, but this is how secured lending works. When a company can't get a loan on its own merits, lenders start asking the founder to personally guarantee it. And when the founder can't offer enough cash or property, they start pledging the things that make them valuable: intellectual property rights, commercial trademarks, licensing agreements, and many other things. And for someone whose entire brand is built on their personal reputation and identity, that's everything. It means if GDA had completed that foreclosure sale, they wouldn't just own the company. They'd own whatever rights Patricia McGrath had pledged personally. And those rights could include things that would make it very difficult, maybe impossible, for her to launch another beauty venture under her own name in the future. So think about what that means, because for over 30 years, building your reputation as the most respected makeup artist in fashion financing. And you're suddenly in a position where a predatory lender who gave you a bridge loan might end up controlling your ability to commercialize your own identity. This is what desperation looks like. This is exactly why Pat McGrath had no choice but to file for bankruptcy when she did. So is the company going to survive this? Honestly, the odds aren't great. The numbers don't suggest a triumphant comeback. Most likely, we're going to see some form of sale during the bankruptcy process, in my opinion, maybe for $30 to $50 million to a buyer who sees value in the brand equity and existing retail relationships. Pat McGrath herself probably won't see much money from that sale after creditors get paid. She put in a decade of work and she'll walk away with little to show for it financially. The most tragic part here is that Pat McGrath Labs could have been incredibly successful as a smaller, more exclusive brand. $50 million in revenue from limited distribution, high margins, controlled growth. That's actually a fantastic business if you don't have private equity expectations hanging over your head. And that's a business that could have supported Pat creatively while building a real sustainable value over decades. And I think about all of the founders out there right now who are getting pitched by investors with eye-popping valuations, especially in the AI space. It feels like winning in validation. Someone thinks that your company is worth 9 figures. How could you say no? Here's what I want you to take away from this Pat McGrath story. The valuation is never the prize. Every dollar of valuation is a promise you're making about future performance. And if you can't deliver on that promise, that impressive number becomes an anchor that drags you down. The right investment isn't the one with the biggest number. It's the one that aligns with where you're actually trying to go. I hope Pat McGrath lands on her feet. She is so talented, she's resilient, and she's got more creative vision in her little pinky finger than most people will have in their entire careers. And I really mean that. Whether it's with this brand or the next thing she does, I hope she gets to build something that reflects her actual values, not someone else's return expectations. And so if you're building something right now, remember this. Your company is worth what it's worth, not what someone's willing to pretend it's worth to make their investment thesis work out. Be really, really careful about taking money that comes with promises you're not sure you can keep. And with that, thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Social Currency. If this story resonated with you, please share it with another founder or someone else who you think needs to hear it. And if you want to support the show, please leave a review or a comment because it actually helps more people find these conversations. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Social Currency. Before you go, take a second to subscribe to the show wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode. And if you liked what you heard today, please rate and review the podcast. It massively helps the work I do to bring the show to life. And if you have a friend who is as obsessed with business and culture as you are, send this episode to them because sharing the show is one of the best ways to support it. And if you want to keep up with the hottest business lore in real time, follow me on Instagram at Sammi Cohen Talks and subscribe to my newsletter, Social Currency, linked in the show notes. Social Currency is a production of Social Currency Media and Money News Network. The podcast is hosted and executive produced by me, Sammi Cohen, and produced by the Money News Network team. See you next time.